the 2020 Worlds meta is actually pretty simple. I think it's probably one of the most simple metas that we've had at Worlds. And it's all about the jungle, right? We've seen multiple teams put resources into their own jungler, and it kind of makes sense in the broad context of the game itself. I mean, we've had players, like mid laners like Chovy, for instance, in DRX, or top laners like Nuguri, who is willing to play a supportive pick, like Lulu or Galio. Of course, this is kind of with the caveat that it still generates pressure. I think that's the most important key thing to take away when you're talking about someone that is willing to sacrifice their lane for the jungler themselves, or for mid game or late game team fights. And so I think we kind of saw this in the very beginning with North America, for instance, with, of course, Cloud9 being very dominant in the beginning of summer by enabling Blabber and, allowing him to get draft resources, or allowing him to invade aggressively, or just get these crazy picks in order to take over the game. And then you had FlyQuest also heavily did this with Santorin, creating his own pressure, and then, playing off of Power of Evil's mid lane pressure, and then also enabling Solo in the top lane. But then additionally, just creating great level 1 plays, which also I think is a side portion to this entire meta, which is creating tricky level 1 or level 2 plays in order to kind of snowball the game in your favor, as it were, right? And this previously wasn't really done a whole lot, especially for North American teams, and that a lot of teams really didn't have a level 1 plan. It was just like, they were playing solo queue in a sense, right? To where you all just kind of wait around the red buff area or the blue buff area, right? And then you leash your jungler, and then you go to your lanes, and that's it. And no one risks an invade unless you have a fucking blitzcrank or something, which which ironically FlyQuest did do in their last match. But it goes to show that with this current meta, it is all about enabling your jungler to get ahead. And that's what a level 1 kind of does anyways, right? You're going in there to take some camps and disrupt the enemy jungler and kind of set him behind and whatnot. And that's what it's all surrounding in that sense. And this is like the side portion of the meta, which is, to do a good level 1 or level 2, which FlyQuest previously in North America were really good at doing. Santorin, obviously, famously, I go back to a lot of his plays to where he would do some weird, strange route, but that means that he could gank at level 2, in the top lane or something, and put Solo ahead and himself ahead as well. So this is the entire meta. And I would even say TSM, to an extent, also enabled their jungler when it came to at least North American playoffs, right? They trusted in Spica a lot, and they enabled him in order to carry a lot of their games and whatnot. Of course, Bjergsen going ham and shit in the mid lane helped a lot too. But yeah, it was just this supportive nature towards the jungler, and you can see this a lot. I mean, the game is no longer about mid solo carrying, right? Like way days in the back, and it's no longer about the duo bot lane, right? Way days in the back for previous metas, and it's not about support roams as much. It's all about the jungler being enabled almost by any means necessary. If a laner has to give up a wave or something, or if they have to give up some pressure or whatnot, it's generally worth it if they can then enable their jungler. And I think generally, as what we initially had in the beginning when we thought of this meta going into 2020 was that it was all about the mid jungle duo, right? And I think this concept somewhat covers what the meta is actually about, right? In that, the jungler is within that particular thought process of the meta. But I think it's more that the mid laner is actually now more the supportive person towards the jungler, rather than them having a 50-50, or maybe that the jungler enables the mid laner to then snowball the rest of the map. I think that's an older way of playing the game now. And teams and players have started to realize that the most mobile portion of the map is actually the jungler, obviously. But it's also the fact that, with picks like Nidalee or Graves or Kindred or whatever, like all of these picks can completely take over games by themselves. And a lot of teams have been drafting their resources into, playing these picks. Hence why Graves is often first picked, or Nidalee is often banned, right? Or, Kindred is one of these picks to where if someone actually wants to try and scale their own jungler, they can do so. And then combined with Senna being one of the primary picks now within group stage, it becomes this obvious awareness, and like even Ashe too, it becomes this awareness to where the ADC even is like this backseat gamer in that sense, right? And so mid as a position itself, normally it was the primary carry role for a lot of different meta. Mid control allows for both easier jungle invades, but also tower dives and uneven numbers in those tower dives, right? Because if the mid laner has the push, then he can roam with his own jungler to tower dive, bot lane most likely. And then also it becomes imperative that if they are going to try and do this tower dive, teams have figured out that now if the tower dive is unsuccessful and the enemy just backs off, the whole point of you going down and moving your mid laner down and your jungler down there is that you then push them off of a wave. So teams have been more intelligent, and you can tell this by the very top teams within the group stage, that not only will they try and do this type of strategy in terms of, trying to tower dive bot lane or whatnot with a numbers advantage because they have the mid wave pushed, but if they aren't able to do that, they still push you off of two waves, right? So it's almost like getting a kill anyways, because you miss out on all that experience and all that gold. So this is the entirely new, different meta, and we've seen a lot of aggressive play from a lot of these junglers in the group stage, which has made their team very successful. I look at, a player like Canyon, who is just completely taking over games, especially on the Graves pick. And I did an interview with their coach, Zepha. It was quite short, actually, by the way. Kind of annoying that interviews are very short with Worlds, especially if you have a translator, because it takes up half the fucking time. But I did have an interview with Dan One Gaming's coach, and, I talked about how Graves is kind of considered this farming jungler. But he was like, yeah, I mean, in a sense he is, but that doesn't mean that you can't just farm the enemy jungle camps, right? So it was like this whole mentality of, which I thought was just fucking baller as shit to say. But it's this mentality that, you can have this aggressive stance as a jungler almost always, and it doesn't really matter what you're kind of playing in that sense, is that you still have to play it in an aggressive manner. And I think that's actually pretty intelligent, and that's very spot on with what the meta is actually supposed to be currently. You look at SOFM, who just plays like an absolute madman. He actually reminds me of Peanut back in his heyday, where he was super aggressive, going for these ridiculous invades, going for these skill checks. That's what SOFM is all about, and I love his style because it's just so in your face. And then you have Selfmade, who has his pocket pick in Evelyn, drawing bans and just generally running the early game for Fnatic, and looks like the best player on the team. So I just think in general, this World's meta, it's the era of the junglers, especially with the ability to create jungle experience gaps, right? We've seen multiple times in a lot of these games to where the jungler is up 2 levels against the enemy jungler. And I don't think that's coincidence. I don't think that just happens for happenstance. It's intentional in that sense that teams want to get their jungler snowballing and rolling, and whenever there is not a gank opportunity, he's creating other opportunities through farm leads and through invades and stealing jungle camps and whatnot. Which we've seen a lot in this tournament. You can even think of Lilia as one of the primary examples of being able to steal jungle camps, right? I think that's largely why she's in the meta as well, too, because it takes away from the enemy jungler in that sense. So additionally, I think we've seen the importance of plate control and the fact that if you can get a plate advantage, that means an early game advantage. And then also, of course, taking down the first tower, which then allows your jungler to have a little bit more room to work with in terms of map pressure and where he can actually go on the map. So overall, this world's meta is one of the more simplistic things to understand, but in that sense, too, it's also just this gigantic skill check in terms of who has this best jungler and also who can create lane pressure, especially within the mid lane, to then help out their own jungler in that sense. So overall, world's meta, it's all about the junglers. Whoever has the strongest jungler is generally going to win, and it's pretty simple, but also I expect this to run over into 2021 season because I think this is one of the fundamental aspects of just how to play League of Legends in general, is that jungle is the most mobile position on the map. And so if you can enable that, that is the easiest point of power to transfer power over into all other lanes, right? So in that essence, it kind of makes logical sense that you would put a lot of your eggs into the jungle basket, so then they can transfer that over into any lane that they so choose. And, you aren't so stuck in the sense back in the day to where it was like, okay, this draft, we're playing towards top lane and that's all that it means. Now it's more so, okay, we're playing towards the jungler, which then can theoretically mean that we then play towards any other lane, so I think it's just a more surefire way to make sure that if you do put all your eggs in one basket, and that basket being the jungler, that is a more assured way to actually be able to spread that momentum out into other lanes, because it's just more difficult to do that if you have it in a specific lane at any specific moment. So it's kind of refreshing to see, but as I said before, I think this will extend over into the 2021 season, even though that we're looking at a very, very kind of nuanced meta in terms of all the new items that are going to come out and whatnot and all those changes. But I still think in terms of the meta for next, season 11, that we will see junglers still have quite a bit of dominance in the game.